See, there's a volume control problem in both directions when power is present. When we have higher power, everything we say gets turned amplified in volume. And when we have lower power, what we say to people in positions of higher power, we mute. We don't say, hey, boss, you really suck at that. We go, well, that was great. And, have you heard about such and such thing? That might be an interesting idea to look at. And the boss is like, yeah, whatever. And they go away and it has no impact.
Welcome to the Made Leader Podcast, where exceptional leadership isn't about who you are, but who you choose to become. Join your host, Jen Arnold, for expert interviews, real-world stories, and practical advice that transforms managers into exceptional leaders. If you're a middle manager ready to unlock your potential, this is your podcast. Let's get started.
Sabina, welcome to the Made Leader Podcast. I'm so glad to have you on today.
Thank you so much, Jen. I'm excited to see how this conversation unfolds.
Me as well. And, before we get started into the questions, if you could complete this sentence for me. If you really knew me, you would know that.
If you really knew me, you would know that I love to start dancing to Bolly X tunes.
Bolly X?
So it's a dance form based on Bollywood songs.
Oh, okay. I've never heard that. So do you have to have music to get started, or what happens?
Yeah. And there's instructors who do classes. But I just love to instead of burst out singing, I like to burst out dancing every once in a while.
I love it. That sounds amazing. And no one can see you. So unfortunately, you can't show off your dance moves at this point.
That's probably kind to this.
Hey, my husband's he's not a singer, but he loves singing. And it does not matter how bad his voice is. He will do it. So. Oh, well, I want to dive into leadership, of course, the topic of today's conversation. But anytime someone gets a promotion, a step up, it comes with some kind of power, right? And people change how they treat you, even though you still feel like the same you, right?
Yeah.
You're like, I'm just the same person.
Yes.
The power dynamics shift. And I want to read a specific line in your book and then get your input to explain it. You say that your work now isn't to avoid the glare, but to hone your ability to shine when it's cast upon you. Explain that to me.
Mm-hmm. The glare is there whether or not you want it as your position gets elevated. And the more elevated it gets, the more in the spotlight you are. Even in your most unguarded moments, even when you're busting out that Bolly X tune, if you will. So you cannot really avoid that. It's going to come, just like your role comes with pressure. So how do you make sure that not only are you showing up as your best self, but as your clearest self to others? As you were saying, Jen, it's so true. People often say, well, I didn't change. I'm still the same me. Why are they? Yes, you didn't change, but your position changed. Position and your positional power changed. And when that changes, how people see you shifts. So it's about becoming much more mindful of how you're showing up, because suddenly you're being strategic might look like you're being manipulative. So taking a moment to be explicit about what you're doing.
Yeah, I like what you said in the book. It's like you watch your face.
Yes.
People are going to start interpreting a yawn as, oh God, this is boring, right?
Yes. And this is boring. And that means I'm going to get demoted. And that means I better cancel my vacation to Cabo because we're not going to be able to afford it, and so on. And now suddenly I've written an entire novel because you're yawning because your dog woke you up early this morning.
Right. Well, what do you recommend for leaders? Because there is that feeling. Like, how do they drop that? Oh, shucks, I'm just one of you. Because they really do feel that. They haven't changed, right? You said the power dynamics changed. Is it just, hey, accept that? don't keep saying, "Hey, I'm just like you." Do they drop that kind of those comments, and they just step into what is given to them, which is a little bit more power?
Absolutely, I would accept that, first of all. It also doesn't come across really well when you say, I'm just like you. I had a CEO speaking on video when COVID first started, and they were on a video call and said, we're all in the same boat. Their background was a grand piano and a view of the waterfront where their villa was. And I'm thinking about the people who don't have those circumstances. You're not in the same boat. And as somebody wise said, we're in the same storm. We're in different boats. So keep that in mind. Just because it's great if you think you're one of the people in terms of your humility, you're not there to lord it out over other people. But the fact is that they are going to make up stories about you regardless. And the fact is that power does come with some privileges.
It does. And there's nothing more fascinating for me as being an outside observer when someone gets promoted and how people show up differently. And I remember when I was a leader, people would show up one way, and then I had someone say, he doesn't do that in meetings where you're not there. And I was like, really? It was fascinating. But even if it's not your team, it's not you, but if you could watch it, the dynamics change.
Yes, that so reminds me, Jen, exactly. I was coaching this woman who was a force. She was fierce. She was powerful. She was decisive. In fact, I had to give her some feedback about being a little bit more mindful of her impact on other people. And we'd worked together for a couple of years on this whole piece. And then 2 years later, we're leaving her office. She's going to see me out as I walk to the reception. And along comes down the hallway the brand new CEO of that organization. And she does a complete 180-degree flip. I see this smiling, simpering woman in front of her person who's in a position of power. So again, that goes to show circumstances change our behavior. It's not that we get personality transplants. It's the circumstance that shifts it.
And should it? I mean, I know to a certain extent you've got to play the politics. You've got to do this, right? There's that piece of that. But at what point are you being true to yourself versus you're turning into a completely different person just to play the game?
Yes, absolutely. So let me make a distinction. Falsely turning into a completely different person just to play the game is not something I would ever recommend. Being intentional that your circumstances fit your behavior is really important, because the more you get promoted, the less it is about you. Everything you're saying or doing or not saying or not doing is impacting dozens, hundreds, thousands of other people. And it's impacting them emotionally, and that then gets translated into how engaged and productive they are or not. So if you're worried about your business results, look at your behavior and what sort of ripple effect it's having.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, the person that was going up to the CEO and they had, changed their posturing and everything. And with the higher you go becomes the power gaps. And I liked how you talked about just the physical distancing, how money will buy you physical distancing. And it goes like that with CEOs are on the fourth floor or they're in the corner office and everything. Yes. But leadership creates power gaps. Can you talk a little bit about what those power gaps look like?
I talk about 3 different power gaps in the book that are most common. And they're most common, the way I've discovered they're most common is through 12,000 pages of data, as I've captured verbatim what people actually think about their bosses. And these are the bosses that I coach. First of all, there's a power gap called the singular story, which is believing that your view is the view. And this happens when the person in a position of power states something. They're used to being right a lot, and they are right a lot, but they also state things rather confidently. Plus, they have the megaphone attached to their mouth. so it comes across more forcefully than they ever realize. As a result, no one else is going to argue with that or bring up a different point of view, especially if that different point of view is in opposition, in clash with what the boss has just said. So this singular story, in many cases, is helpful. It makes things efficient, you're decisive, you move forward, until it's not. And it's not when you take that story is flawed or incomplete. And suddenly you've built a great, beautiful piece of engineering as a bridge, and it's not bridging to anywhere. It's not going anywhere. So you've created a great solution for the wrong problem. Another power gap is a set of them, but they're all in the area of communication, and I call them communication fault lines. Everything from being not clear on feedback to what your face says about you to over-explaining and overdoing your speaking all fall within those communication fault lines.
That's a very familiar one, the communication piece, and that happens on any team, right?
Right? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. The third one is the myth of the exceptional, where, look, these jobs are hard jobs. They're incredibly hard jobs. They're very pressure-filled, and you're always, as you said, Jen, in the spotlight. So as we get into these roles, slowly we start to think we deserve more. We deserve that extra glass of wine and put it on our expense report. We deserve some more understanding and grace if we lost our temper because we just flew in red eye from somewhere. In our first class seat, but red eye from somewhere. So we start to conflate superior as a noun with superior as an adjective. Just because I'm a superior, like supervisor, hierarchically superior, doesn't mean I'm a superior person to you. And that sort of thinking you deserve that exceptional treatment or that you are exceptional in that way also creates that big gap between you and those who have less power than you.
Yeah, it sounds like the definition of a brilliant jerk, as they're called.
Yes.
Is that similar?
Yes, often it is. Often it is.
And many organizations encourage it or they enable it. Even if they're not encouraging it, it happens, right? There's plenty of these toxic individuals that they're so brilliant, the organization can't lose them.
Exactly. I mean, I don't think anyone's had problems either censuring or getting rid of non-brilliant jerks.
Mm-hmm.
They feel held hostage with the brilliance of the person. Yet there is research that shows that when somebody like that leaves the organization, it significantly uplifts the performance of the entire organization. So do you want to work with an N of 1 or do you want to work with an N of 100?
In no one in an organization, that's why it's an organization, no one person is going to be the fall of the organization. Of course, CEOs own everything.
Yeah.
But, when you're talking outside of that position, it's
right.
It's an organization, not an organization of one.
Right.
It's cushy there in that power gap. It's nice. It's comfortable. People are telling you what you want to hear. No one's arguing. Like, why? Why? Because I'm sure you've gotten people who have been forced to come see you, of course. But why would they get out of this power gap?
Absolutely. Look, who doesn't want power? Most people would say, yeah, give me more money. Give me a seat on the front of the plane. Give me the praise. Tell me I'm right all the time. Why wouldn't I want it? Except it's a little bit of an illusion and a delusion. It doesn't last. Because what ends up happening, if you have that singular story about what needs to be done, you're going to fail. So when you fail, it's a house of cards and they're going to come toppling very, very fast. That's why. It's not the immediate temporary satisfaction that plays to our inner narcissist or our inner comfort seeker. It's sustained success over time. Do you truly want to be seen as smart and powerful? If so, figure out where your power is actually tripping you up.
Yes. Do you find that people have that? I'm sure you see all types of people come to you. So are people having some kind of awakening that they're like, oh, I can be a better leader? Like, is it internal drive, or is it more something happens externally that maybe they don't succeed one time, or maybe they get some 360 feedback that blows them away?
Most often it's an external factor. It could be a disaster that happened and they suddenly realize, oh, nobody told me and I'm the last one to find out. Why did that happen? Though, of course, then their tendency is going to be to want to blame everyone else but themselves, unless there's a coach there. Often in my work, it happens after I've interviewed their dozen or so coworkers and I bring back the feedback. When I give them the themes of the feedback, they go, oh, you scared me unnecessarily. These are fine. Yeah, they're not a surprise. Yes, I know I need to do better at curiosity or listening or whatever it might be. And I say, wait till you read the verbatims, because I give them about 50 pages of verbatims. And that is a gut punch, because they're reading in the words of their coworkers, in the words of real people, not an external consultant, exactly how they're perceived and which behavior caused which reaction. Because every action has a reaction. And they have no idea what the reaction is, because they're in an echo chamber of the boss is right and yes, boss, and the boss is great. So it comes as a big shock. And that big shock is first accompanied by all those stages of grief, denial, anger. Oh, this is so unfair. It's incorrect. Maybe I should leave. So a little bit of a fight-flight response. And I let them stew in their juices for a couple of weeks, Jen, after they've read the feedback, because they need to go through that process before they're able to get to the other side and realize, you know what? Perception is reality. Some might be true, some might be untrue, but it's all true because this is how it's impacting other people. No matter, even if I were to quit and go somewhere else, I'm likely going to find myself in the same place.
Yeah, you're bringing yourself. So
you're bringing yourself. Exactly. So let's work on this. What have you got? Let's brainstorm. Let's figure out how to go past this.
Yeah, that's a heavy thing to process in a few weeks, just sitting there with that feedback. And I imagine that when they're ready to talk to you, there is some kind of insight that they see and hopefully want to work on.
Exactly.
Well, getting back to the power dynamics, one thing is that I've seen with leaders is they are the ones doing the talking, right? It's them. And it's almost like I do it too. So like you just want to fill the silence. Sometimes it's like, well, no one else is talking, so I'll just keep talking, right? I've seen this. I've actually had someone say, I just need to be quieter. But you actually have some shut up exercises, which I want you to go through in a minute. But what do you see? Like when leaders stop doing the talking and start doing the listening, what are those immediate impacts?
The immediate impact is terrible. So anybody who is given this guidance to say, exercise your shut up muscle, they come back after the first couple of meetings and go, that was a terrible idea. And I go, oh, yeah, tell me why. And I know exactly what they're going to say, because they all say the same thing, which is, it was crickets. Nobody else said anything. And then there was this awkward silence. And then finally I had to jump in and say something. And there we have it. Because it's a two-way dance. It is not just the person. Look, we all like to criticize people in positions of leadership, but it is also highly convenient when they do all the work, all the talking, and I can hide behind that in the position of follower. It keeps me off the hook. I don't have to take accountability for things. I can zone out and check my Instagram feed while they're talking. So it's a two-way dance, and we are both complicit in it. They're used to you doing all the dancing. When you stop, the music stops for them. They don't know how to step on the dance floor. So of course there's going to be silence, because they're hoping if they wait you out, you will comply. And sure enough, you do. So first of all, everybody's figuring out, oh, it's no longer the tango, it's the salsa. What are we going to do? So that's one immediate reaction is it backfires. But it backfires because you have to wait. You have to actually give it through its paces. And you could be explicit with people. hey, when we come back to the next meeting, I'm working on this and I'm going to be the fifth person to speak. So be prepared with your thoughts. And it'll still be hard. It'll still be awkward. But then, of course, a beautiful thing happens. Many of my clients, I tell them, if you have weekly staff meetings, you do not need to attend every meeting. Attend every alternate meeting as CEO. Let the rest of your direct reports run that other meeting, get through a bunch of stuff that they really need to get through with each other. You don't need to be in the room. Once you start exercising your shut up muscle, you recognize where you are providing a unique contribution and where others are plenty fine doing things without you.
Yeah, I love that you said it. When I was thinking immediate impact, in my mind, it would be a positive thing. But you're like, no, it's terrible. It's uncomfortable. It's awkward. And it is preparing leaders for that, right?
Yeah.
And pushing through instead of being
Exactly.
that one to fill the
Exactly.
silence because it feels
Exactly.
uncomfortable.
Yep.
So give me at least one shut up exercise that we could tell leaders to go practice, knowing it's going to be awkward.
Well, one shut up exercise is just simply be the third or later person to speak. That is the simplest, easiest one. Another one would be using what I call margin notes. So as you're taking notes about whatever's being said in the main page, on the margin, write down your thoughts and ideas. These are things which tend to make you want to speak up early and often interrupt other people because you're afraid you're going to lose track of those. So capture them in the margin and shut up and only bring them up later if nobody else has brought them up.
I think that's good. You're just taking your notes, you're biding your time, you're just sitting there, you look involved, you look interested, but you're not the one speaking. And I also like what you said. And it's usually similar advice I give leaders is like, tell them what you're working on. This is hard for me. I'm trying to shut up more. And like you said, I'm going to be the fifth person to speak. So, let people call you on that, right?
Yes,
It's
exactly.
okay to call me on that if I'm before the fifth person.
Exactly. And again, more often than not, before they start calling you on it, they're going to call you to speak before being the fifth person because they don't like that change either. It's discombobulating for them. So they're going to go, well, I know, Bob, you're going to be the fifth person, and we've only had one person speak, but we really could gain some valuable, they'll flatter you, some valuable advice if you spoke up right now. And sure enough, you take the bait, you get seduced, and
so what do you think a leader should say? Nope, not my turn.
Not my turn. I do have a point of view, but it is really important for me to hear from each of you before I chime in.
Okay.
I promise I'll share my thoughts.
Right.
You're not being evasive, you're just postponing some things.
Yeah, and I like that you talk about it being a two-way street because I think leaders definitely get a bad rap, that they're not doing it right or they're running inefficient meetings, but no one's stepping up to say, hey, let me lead the agenda. Let me create. I want, it is a blame game sometimes. So I like that you talk about it as a two-way street. I don't know quite the dance terminology, so that's... So one thing that I do see a lot with leaders is they get frustrated. A lot of frustration that their team's not the deliverables aren't lining up with maybe what they expected. We'll talk about delegation in a minute, but it's maybe a project they're working on and, it could be done differently, right? So you talk about, I say make the implicit explicit. You said explicit earlier. So you have a scaling tool. This was one of my favorite tools in the book. There's a ton of them in the book, by the way, but walk us through this scaling tool.
It's simply saying, there's a volume control problem in both directions when power is present. When we have higher power, everything we say gets amplified in volume. And when we have lower power, what we say to people in positions of higher power, we mute. We don't say, hey, boss, you really suck at that. We go, well, that was great. And, have you heard about such and such thing? That might be an interesting idea to look at. And the boss is like, yeah, whatever. And they go away and it has no impact. So if you used a scaling tool to say, as a manager particularly, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm concerned about this at a 2. They might then still use the filter, the volume filter, and say, "Ooh, it's a 5," but hopefully they're not going to make it a 10. If you just say, "I'm concerned about this," now they're sacrificing their weekends over something that doesn't need it. So you could use it to convey the level of urgency or importance of something that helps differentiate what's important, what's not. Otherwise, everything that's coming out of your mouth is a priority. You can also use it to convey emotion. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm excited at a 20 about this project. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm afraid about what will happen in scenario X. At a 5, I think we should have a robust plan and continue doing what we're doing, but have these backup things in place. So using that sort of relative scaling gives other people more clarity on where you stand and what's important.
Yes. And it's helpful both ways, I think. Like as a leader saying, hey, this is the new goal, or here's a goal, or here's a project, and a priority level, it's a 2 out of a 10. And then also someone asking their leader on a scale of 1 to 10,
Exactly.
how important is this?
Exactly. So it's a great way to manage up. It's also, if you're communicating to somebody who has more power than you, it's a way to unmute yourself a little bit to be clearer, especially if you want attention on something.
Yeah.
Manager, on a scale of 1 to 10, this is an 8. Because otherwise, if you just went and said, yeah, I'm concerned about this, they might go, they have a lot more concerns from 5 other people. You're not the only one they're managing.
Right. And then the manager may not see it as important just because maybe that person's always coming with little things, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's a great tool for people to use because leaders are vague about things. I've had a CEO say, hey, look into this. And I was like, okay.
What does that mean? Yeah.
Right. And of course, it was like on a weekend or after hours. And then I'm thinking, but yeah, it feels a little fearful to ask the clarifying questions. And so you just go do.
Yeah.
Instead of asking. And I've run into this a million times with clients. When do you need that proposal? 2 weeks is fine. When I was thinking in my mind it was urgent, I was going to spend the whole weekend writing the proposal.
Exactly.
They're not in a rush. All right. So let's get on to delegation. It does not matter I don't know. I've seen it in all levels of leaders, but delegation seems to be a very difficult skill. And, you write about leaders who suck up uncompleted tasks. So there's different pieces. I want to go here first. So I have seen leaders who are so empathetic and compassionate. They want to save their team. I've heard them say, I know they're overloaded, so I'm just going to take it. What's the problem with that?
Mm-hmm. Well, clearly one is you overburden yourself. More importantly, you're keeping them in the dark and you're not developing them. And then when you do start to delegate, they're not going to do well. And then there's frustration and disempowerment on both sides of the power divide. Because all this while, you've given them training wheels on a tricycle, not even a bicycle somehow, if that were possible. And suddenly you want them to ride a bicycle on a velodrome and wonder why they're falling down. Mm-hmm. So it's about building that skill, that capacity in other people. Also, you may think they have a lot going on, and maybe they do, but maybe they want that extra opportunity. It provides visibility, or it gives them something new to stretch themselves on. So by you deciding, they don't get to be the boss of their own choices.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because I think it's a mindset shift, right? So I'm doing this to help my people, but you're not helping. In fact, you could be stifling their growth, but really it's also, I think, an opportunity for communication.
Yes.
On what level? We go back to the scaling tool.
Yes.
On 1 to 10, how are you feeling about your workload?
Yes. Exactly.
So the other thing I've seen with delegation is leaders are really good and it's really easy and it's easier, right? So it's like, oh, I can just do it so much easier myself, right? Than delegate.
Yes.
And I think the other thing I've seen is it's just they like doing it.
Yes. Yes. So
in their wheelhouse.
Exactly. It's easier. It's faster. No one else will have the same initiative. I know exactly what's needed. It's hard to explain it. Underneath all of it, I also really enjoy doing it. And underneath that, I'm actually afraid to do some of the other things that I really should be doing. And this is my comfort zone. Still doing part of the job that I've been promoted out of.
So true. So true. It takes away from the more strategic work they need to do that is not as fun and as hard and as complicated, playing in their strengths. So how do you recommend that they effectively delegate to their teams?
Mm-hmm. The number one mistake with all these reasons why people don't delegate, when they do go to delegate, the number one mistake they make is treating delegation as an on-off switch. Here you go. I'm giving you this. I'm empowering you. We use all this corporate speak, not knowing whether this person is clear on the task, whether they're skilled to do it, whether they have enough context and knowledge. And what happens most of the time, especially if you haven't delegated a lot before, the end result the person produces is not great. They hand that to you a day before the deadline, and there goes your weekend. There goes their empowerment. There goes your level of pressure. Your gauges are going to start running high and red. Delegation is not an on-off switch. It is a dial. And I've created a delegation dial to walk through the spectrum of delegation. In other words, think about the task, think about the employee. To what extent are they suited to take this on right now? If they're not, start by doing. Just do the thing yourself and have them watch. Then you tell them. That's the second notch on the delegation dial. Tell them how it should be done. Teach them. The reason we do it this way is this. The reason we avoid that is this. Then coach them. What else can you think of? What else have you tried? What do you think is going to get in the way? And only then do you switch off as the fifth stage of the evolution of delegation. So it takes a lot to get to that on-off switch. And you might think, oh my gosh, that's so much work. It's actually a lot more work if you have to jump in and rescue and damage control, or worse, provide damaged goods to somebody else.
Or just stay stuck with the task.
Or
right?
stay stuck with the task.
Then your plate's full.
Yes.
Your people aren't growing. Like
Exactly.
it's just it's like this short-term pain to get those
Yes.
nice long-term benefits, right?
Yes.
And I love that because I've seen it both ways. It's either off, hey, here, like you said, the autonomy, here, I'm giving you full power. I'm not going to like the results, or it's micromanaging. So it's not really. So I love that you have that dial and that process that people can use if their team isn't quite ready for that level.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Now, I think I would be remiss not to talk about leaders in a human way, right? I think we have a tendency, especially with senior leaders, to treat them like they're not humans. They don't have needs and wants and real feelings. So I really like that you introduced this concept of unmet hunger. Mm-hmm. I've heard it many different ways. I've talked about it many different ways, but I love this. And explain a little bit more about what that is.
Yeah. Unmet hungers are very human needs for validation, affirmation, needing to be seen a certain way, like perhaps seen as the smartest person in the room, seen as super competent, seen as perfect, seen as the hero or the martyr, to want to hog up all the limelight or to play small. These are all human needs that get formed very early in life. And I'm sure, Jen, you're very familiar with these and the psychology behind them. And there are many, many terms. But when we go to work hungry, it's like going to the store hungry and buying junk food. Our actions have an outsized reaction. They're driven by those hungers. One example of this, actually, there's several clients who fall in this category, who this person really wanted a lot of positive praise, a lot of patting on the back. Yes, you've done a great job. Yes, you're wonderful. They were going to go into a meeting with some really tough decisions that needed to be made and provide some tough feedback to their team members. We strategized about it. They had a plan. They did nothing of the sort when they went to the meeting, because guess what? Your team is on to you. They know what your unmet hungers are, and they know you're about to come read them the riot act as well. So they distracted them with a lot of praise. And the conversation went, oh, yeah. Oh, what else did I do? Oh, what do you think about that? Tell me more. And that hunger was running the show, as opposed to being strategic about where this organization needs to go.
Yeah, it's human. It's that human need to be liked and accepted. And it still applies to people in senior level positions. And I think that's something to recognize. And the example you just shared, they took advantage of that.
Yes.
We've all got it. Do you have any thoughts on how leaders can tap into that unmet hunger?
They could read the book and go to the table that's the hunger tracker tool.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, they could look at where they start to get anxious when they don't get something. Like they haven't gotten praise in a while and they're starting to wonder, and they're making up bigger stories than necessary, bigger stories than logical. Like, oh, nobody's told me good job in a week. Does this mean I'm on the outs? Oh gosh, maybe I'm going to get fired. And you know what? If I get fired here, nobody else is going to hire me. These are clearly big catastrophic stories that they're making about something that didn't get met that week. Most likely it's coming from a place of unmet hungers.
That's a good one. And I definitely highly recommend your book, which we'll talk about in just a minute. All right. So let's just say a middle manager is listening to this right now. What is one immediate thing that they can do to be a better leader tomorrow?
I'm trying to sift through a variety of things because each person will probably have a different preferred tool or method. We talked a lot about the shut up muscle, and I'll stick with that, Jen. Do less, speak less, and sense more. Because when you stop over participating, you are going to become smarter in sensing your surround. Who's speaking, who's not speaking, what are the nonverbal signals being exchanged amongst people, who needs to speak more. All of that becomes much more clear when you've stopped over participating. So that's something people could do a lot more of.
Yes, I think that's a good one. I think we can all learn from that, including myself. So, Sabina, where can people find out more about you and get your book, You're the Boss?
Thank you. They could go to my website, sabinanawaz.com. That's SABINANAWAZ. And there's a link to the book there, but the book is also available everywhere books are sold.
All right, I'll link that up in the show notes. But Sabina, before we end, is there anything that you want to leave the listeners with, perhaps something I didn't ask you or anything that has come up?
The thing I would leave people with is that the more accomplished you get, the less you know about how you're being viewed by others. And sometimes also about what's going on in the business, because people will tell you less and less of the unvarnished truth.
It's the whole reason they have that show, Undercover Boss.
Yes, exactly. Go join that show.
Well, Sabina, thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate it.
Jen, thank you so much. This was a delight.